Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between myself and Michael K Vaughan, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths. And today is a special June on the Range episode of Epic Comic Book Wednesday because Michael is also the posse leader and head cheerleader of June on the Range, a BookTube event that is much beloved, in which people read Westerns and talk about Westerns. So for today, he picked the Rawhide Kid, one of Marvel Comics' signature Western heroes back at a time when their Western comics were really, really popular. Going back even before there was Marvel Comics, when the outfit was Atlas Comics, and there was a version of the Rawhide Kid. Back then, Stan Lee was still churning out tons and tons and tons of scripts, and he could write Westerns in a particularly signature way. But there wasn't much to differentiate between any of the Western heroes, one from the other. They all just had standard Western names, the Gunslinger, the Two-Gun Kid, the Kid Colt, the Rawhide Kid. There wasn't much difference between any of them because there wasn't supposed to be. There wasn't supposed to be any difference between them. They weren't supposed to be individuals. They were supposed to be just the hero of a Western story. And that was supposed to be good enough for you. But then the times changed. So for a while, those early Rawhide Kid stories, he was indistinguishable from any other Western hero. In that he was, well, let me get you an example here. Yeah, he's the guy in orange there. He's always the tallest person in the room. He's as wide as the door. He's got gigantic superhero muscles, a big stereotypical square jaw. He wears a white hat and is kind of a roving, unofficial sheriff. Look at that. Looks like something out of Michelangelo. He's kind of a roving, unofficial sheriff in that the sheriffs that he meets all defer to him. They all deputize him. He gets to help them with their cases. There's no question of whether or not they should turn on him, whether or not they should turn him in. There's no thought of anything like that. See, this is that Rawhide Kid. It's just really kind of silly. He's basically just this gigantic square-jawed superhero, and those adventures are standard, just standard Atlas, Marvel era Western adventures where there's a plot, there's a couple of bad guys. It's all very, very prefabricated, which I'm not complaining about at all, not in the slightest. But then in the 60s, Stan Lee decided to revamp the Rawhide Kid. And he wasn't teamed up anymore with Dick Ayers or with his brother or for artwork or anything like that. He was teamed up with Jack Kirby. And it was a Jack Kirby who, for a long time, for about 2.5, maybe 3 decades, Kirby was learning on the job. There was a period where he stopped learning, and he kept doing comic book artwork for 25 years after that. And I think it's fair to say, that Stan Lee also was learning for a long while and then stopped and continued to write the same story over and over again. So Kirby's style had the same frenetic energy as it had during his World War II books, during his very early work on the Newsboy Commandos, or the Sandman. But it was getting better. It was getting more effective all the time. And so you have Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, comic books golden team up, doing Rawhide Kid, this new Rawhide Kid, who was no longer a jut-jawed Superman figure, and he was no longer unambiguously accepted by the law. He was wanted by the law. You can see what I'm talking about here, right? There is the Rawhide Kid. That one panel has more legitimate artistic ability than any of the stuff that we saw. That is the Rawhide Kid thanking his horse. He says, "Goodbye, good boy, Nightwind. I'd have hated to miss this stage." And he's leaping onto the stage like that. That's a crime. But also, it's an ethical lapse, because what's Nightwing supposed to do now? So he's, thanks a lot for the lift. I'm going to get this stage for a long, long time. I may see you again. I may not. uh, this episode has great little Kirby artwork, the kind of confidence you get if you are an A-list artist as opposed to a B or C-list artist. There, the Rawhide Kid swings into the stage. Look at the look on this panel. That is terrific. He swings into the stage, and these two bravados are trying to impress him. One of them can crush a coin in his hand. Notice how the panel is exactly the same. The progression of these three panels is exactly the same. You don't get that from a normal hack artist who's just being told, do these 8 pages. I need them Monday. You don't get anything like that from something like that. And it continues with the action. Because the action is incredible in these. The Rawhide Kid is also different. It's not just his legal status, it's also his physical status. He is tiny. He's short. he's short, and it isn't always clear, but sometimes it's very clear that he's very young. That he's a short, young guy, which there's a pin-up for you. Which differentiates him not only from his previous incarnation, who was this big statuesque superhero, but also from all of other Marvel Comics' other Western heroes. Stan Lee did a light brush revamp of pretty much all of them, especially Kid Colt, Two Gun Kid, and especially Rawhide Kid, where suddenly it was possible to distinguish between these characters where it hadn't been before. That's pretty interesting, and those stories are pretty good. They are pretty good. There's one here, let's see. This is a story called The Twister, where there's all sorts of a plot line involving settlers and Native Americans, First Nations people. We get more Jack Kirby great panel work here. Just terrific stuff. And then you also get the supernatural feats that the kid was prone to do, where he can get his guns to do just anything. Just a point of reference: there is no way to shoot a bow apart with a bullet from straight in front of someone without also shooting that someone. There's no way to do that. The slugs in these guns were heavy in the hand. They didn't fracture if they hit a wooden bow. But in the climax of this story, the kid has not only succeeded in showing his bravery to the settlers and also the Indians, but there's a twister, there's an actual twister that comes roaring across the plain. We're told with a grateful cry, the kid ducks behind a protecting boulder while the fury of the twister spends itself on the great plain. No, no, that's not how that works. No, he would be killed, but not in the Stan Lee. And in the Stan Lee story, there he calls Nightwind to him. Nightwind apparently is no hard feelings for having been abandoned when he catches that stage, and he just rides off. Rides off into the sunset. The kid does that all the time. These stories are very saccharine, very, very saccharine. Often the story will be like, for instance, there's a signature story for this revamped Rawhide Kid where a boy is disillusioned with his father, thinks that his father is too peaceful, that he's a yellow-bellied sidewinder, and then the kid rides into town. Of course, the boy is deeply admiring the kid. The kid is a big hero of his. And the father sees this, and the kid sees this, and the kid decides in a very syrupy kind of way to get into a fake fight with the father and let the father win in front of the kid. So that the boy thinks, oh, my hero isn't anything he's cracked up to be. My real hero is my dad. that kind of saccharine stuff is just all through these Rawhide Kid stories. But they're very effective. It's a good update of a character. I don't agree with characters being updated, but it's a good update of a character. It is Stan Lee zeroing in, as he had a way of doing, on a couple of simple things that will not only differentiate his hero, but add drama to his hero. So will my hero be a man of science who turns into a monster of rage? Will my hero be blind? Etc., etc. Well, will there be some sort of an easy gimmick that will make this hero immediately relatable? And that's true with the kid. That happens with Rawhide Kid. He is not only very young, but also short. He's a small person. That is really good. That works really well. It's pretty simple. I loved that. I loved the Marvel Westerns anyway. I love the Atlas Westerns anyway. I was a big fan of them. As I think I mentioned in an earlier June on the Range video, they were really my introduction to Westerns. And I liked the new Rawhide Kid. He was distinct from Two Gun Kid. He was distinct from Kid Colt. Not just on what he wore. You could tell that he was different. He was physically different. I liked those stories a lot. And I have to admit, it's not a shameful admission. I love a good Stan Lee, Jack Kirby collaboration. I could read them doing 8 pages of anything. And their Rawhide Kid stories are taut little gems. Little masterpieces of storyboard storytelling. This was around the revamp of Rawhide Kid was around the time that Stan Lee was revamping all of superhero comic books, and that started to take off. The Western heroes, not so much, but the same thing as with the books. They were falling into the shadow by now. Marvel for a long time did reprints of Westerns. Mighty Marvel Westerns, what it was called, was a reprint issue that pulled together stories from the hundreds and hundreds of stories that they did for all of their characters. And that limped along. It did fairly well. I wish that I still had those issues. Not because I put much stock by reprint issues, but because almost all of those issues had original cover art by Gil Kane. And that's no small thing. That's no small thing at all. Can I get an example? That was not an original Rawhide Kid cover. That's a Gil Kane cover, and it's a beauty. And there were a lot of them that were like that. A lot of them were really nice. But those didn't sell either, and eventually Marvel just stopped doing anything with Westerns at all. So when the Stan Lee era of superheroes was launched and properly underway, and I was grudgingly starting to like some of those titles, I often wondered, where does this fit? Since you, Stan Lee, are making me think about continuity. I don't want to, but since you've introduced the Stan Lee virus into the superhero world, and you're making me think about continuity, I have to wonder, well, okay, you did these heroes, these Western heroes under the banner of Marvel Comics. Are they in continuity? Did they exist in the 19th century of Reed Richards and Sue Storm? And I thought, you can wonder that, but you'll never know. And then there was a storyline in the Avengers, George Perez artwork, where a small group of Avengers go into the 19th century. They travel into the 19th century. Thor is one of them. And because I'd often wondered, well, wouldn't it be neat if my favorite Marvel Western hero, Rawhide Kid, met my favorite Marvel superhero, Thor? I thought it would never happen. Or maybe there'd be a story in Thor's own book where he was alive in the 19th century, of course, and maybe he met Western heroes then. But instead, the Avengers go back in time. I've shown you that issue many times. It, of course, involves Kang the Conqueror. And before Thor has his epic confrontation with Kang in those issues. I wonder if could I get straight to those and show you them again? I mean, what's the good of having an electronic library if I can't do that, right? Let's see if we can do that. Let's see if we can go to straight to those issues. There's no reason why I should be able to talk about that confrontation without showing it to you. Yes, oh my God, I think I can. How incredible. How incredible. Here, let me show you the moment that I'm talking about. Because in that storyline, Thor does meet the Marvel Western heroes. There he is with Two Gun Kid. Can you believe it? And he eventually confronts Kang the Conqueror. And Thor doesn't confront Kang the Conqueror with words. And he doesn't confront him with Avengers Assemble either. The thing to remember about Thor on the Avengers is that he's a thousands of year old god. He's not a Marvel superhero. He didn't, make a nifty gadget in Lower Manhattan. He's a god of Norse mythology. So there are times all throughout the Avengers run where he just almost says, Avengers who? I've got an enemy here. I'm going to face him the way I've faced enemies for the whole of the time that I've been alive. And he does. He does. He faces Kang alone. And Kang taunts him and says, well, surely you know that you can't penetrate my force field. And Thor says, oh, I know, all right. But I can knock the force field around to my heart's content. I can blast you out of your own citadel. And Kang says, blast him. He can't actually strike my person. But if he moves my protective field, he moves me. I'm not anchored to the ground. I've been ousted from my citadel. And Thor is landing in front of him and says, as was meant to be, knave. Now, 'neath the open skies, thou and I, hand to hand, shall settle thy fate once and for all. And he puts his hammer in his belt. He's going to do this with his hands. But keep in mind, this is a character who just recently, the year before this issue came out, had seemingly killed Iron Man. And Thor, at the moment, wanted to kill him. He was only stopped by a caving ceiling. Or Thor, the Avenger, the Marvel superhero, the Comics Code superhero, would have killed the villain. And here he says, I have had enough. I've had enough of this posturing of you constantly taunting us in the 20th century and the 19th century. So now, I love the detail 'neath the open skies. We're going to settle this once and for all. And it works. Kang is pushing his technology to the limits. Thor is just pounding on his force field. The force field hasn't gone anywhere. Thor is just pounding on it. And Kang can't imagine how much power is being unleashed here. He says, my protection strains toward unknown limits to conquer the rage of the Thunder God, yet it will hold. But defense is not the way of Kang the Conqueror. I must strike back, overcome. And he says, feel the force of my dissolution being, godling. Feel the force of conquest. And Thor says, I feel it, and I continue to stand. Perfect argument there that Thor is invulnerable. Yes, he uses his hammer to block bullets, but he is invulnerable. You're not going to be able to hurt him. And Kang realizes, well, if that won't do it, I'll increase power until I finally do best you. But his power has limits. And Thor eventually starts to tell him, hold, man, thou dost push thyself too far. But it's too late. Kang's mechanisms overload. And he seems to be gone. He seems to be dead. Of course, you can't keep a good supervillain down. But in the process, we get our Marvel heroes meeting these great Atlas era and early 60s era Marvel Western heroes. Look at this Gil Kane cover. There is Thor facing off against them, and there is the Rawhide Kid right in the background there. And they even remember that Nightwind is gray. That Nightwind is a gray horse. That's just incredible. So I did get that. I did get my favorite Marvel superhero meeting my favorite Marvel Western hero. Just briefly, I don't think they even speak in the course of the story. It's more a Kid Colt and Two Gun Kid that get the spotlight, not Rawhide Kid. Although Rawhide Kid does have a couple of good little panels. And George Perez, bless him, there's no visual detail about any character that George Perez ever forgot. So he remembers that this Rawhide Kid, the new revamped Rawhide Kid, is slighter and smaller than the other heroes. That's just terrific. So I did get that, but as for the classic era Rawhide Kid, I don't know that Marvel has ever done an epic collection of Rawhide Kid, or two. I'm not sure off the top of my head how many Atlas era Rawhide Kid appearances there were. And I don't know. I know that the revamped Rawhide Kid in the 60s, I'm pretty sure that the revamped Rawhide Kid in the 60s took up the original numbering of Rawhide Kid, even though it had been 10 years or so since there was an issue. But I don't know how many of those there were where Stan Lee and Jack Kirby teamed up. Probably enough for more than one volume, although the epic collections are fairly thick. If there's an epic collection of the Rawhide Kid, I'm sure that Michael K Vaughan has it. I'm sure that he does. And if I remember correctly, there was a Marvel Masterworks, a hardcover volume, that collected at least some of these things. I'm not sure, legally speaking, whether or not Marvel could collect those Atlas era appearances. I don't know. It seems to me that they could, though, because if I remember correctly, they were reprinted in those Mighty Marvel Western reprint comic books that you got for 25 cents. So surely, if there were any legal problems, they were hashed out then, 50 years ago. But even if Marvel could do that. I don't know why they would. Like we mentioned on June on the Range, all month long, Westerns are out of favor, seemingly permanently. No general audience wants them. So Marvel might do that just to I don't know, to retain copyright or whatever, or for the pleasure of bringing out a beautiful volume of collaboration between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. That's no small thing. And it's not just a collaboration between Lee and Kirby, it's also signature collaboration. You can look at those Rawhide Kid issues and see, oh, yes, okay, this has tongue-in-cheek humor, this has really cheesy but really effective melodrama, and it has those Kirby visuals, the Kirby visuals that he was learning and relearning during this period. Surely any company would be proud to reprint that, even if it meant low sales on the consumer end. It hasn't happened yet, as far as I know. I don't think I remember a Rawhide Kid Epic Collection, and I don't think there are any plans to feature any of these characters. They just belong in the past. So we had the Atlas era Rawhide Kid, who was kind of this super sheriff who roamed from town to town and got their help or gave them help and was invulnerable. He could stand like this while he's shooting his guns and you couldn't hit him, couldn't hurt him. And then we got the real Rawhide Kid, a really neat Rawhide Kid, a younger, more vulnerable, smaller, shorter kid who's a wildcat of vitality. Not only is he supernatural with his gunplay, but he's a little whirlwind in a fight. Maybe not supernatural, but just what you want. And fighting in a way that, for instance, the Two-Gun Kid, who at this time was also sometimes drawn by Jack Kirby, does not fight. They give him a different physicality, which is really, really good. And after that 1960s Marvel revamp of Rawhide Kid, the character was never revamped again. The end. Thank you, BookTube.